And we are recording now. So thank you very much for joining us. I'm the co-host and our lead host is Quentin. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start us off with the land acknowledgement, and then we're going to do some introductions. So to start off with the land acknowledgement, Georgian College acknowledges that all campuses are situated on the traditional land of the Anishinaabe people. The Anishinaabe include the Ottawa, Ojibwe, and Potawatomi nations, collectively known as the Three Fires Confederacy. Georgian College is dedicated to honoring Indigenous history and culture and committed to moving forward in the spirit of reconciliation with all the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people. Thank you. So I'm going to pass it over to Quentin to introduce himself, and then I'll briefly introduce myself next.
Thank you, Martin, and good morning, everyone. I see a lot of names and some awesome faces that I recognize too, which makes me really, really excited. Really happy people could join us today, and also love when you get the cameras on. Really, really appreciate being able to see some faces as well. Totally understand if you can't, if you have bandwidth issues, maybe you're actually still in bed. No problem, you do your thing. We won't, no judgment over this place. So thank you for joining us today for the UN SDG 101. So this is a very top level introduction. So to start, my name, for those I haven't met, my name's Quentin Evans. I work for the Center for Changemaking and Social Innovation. I am the Community Co-Action Coordinator, which is a pretty cool alliteration, actually. CCC basically work with a lot of community members trying to build capacity. And that's partly where the SDGs wind up intersecting really well, is thinking about our students and our community partners, some of the projects they do. And so before we actually dive into a couple of things, I want to toss over to Martin so that he can introduce himself as well.
Great, thank you, Quentin. So I'm Martin Rochon. I work with Quentin at the Center of Changemaking and Social Innovation at Georgian College. It's very same thing as Quentin said. It's just great to see the cameras on. We really thank you for that. But just thank you for also being here. I'll be throwing in some key points in chat, so you can, if in case you missed something as well. I was just going to type in, but you can also do that. Feel free to introduce yourself in the chat as well. Perhaps what area you're from, if it happens to be Barrie or outside, what program you're in, and any other tidbit you might want to share with us. But just a warm welcome to everyone, and I'll pass it back to Quentin.
Thank you. Okay, team. So where do we start today? Well, the very first thing we want to start is talking about something really briefly called Say My Name. This is an incredible campaign. I'm going to drop our link in our chat for those who maybe haven't seen it before. But if you see my name on the screen and sort of the phonetic spelling, this is something that we really promote. And it ties in really nicely to the SDGs as well. Because the thought of the global goals is that we are actually working with multiple partners from across the world, oftentimes trying to solve some of these major challenges. And so one of our challenges, whether virtually or at a conference in person, is we see a name and we say, well, how do I say that name properly? For those of you in my classes, you know how I've butchered your names at times because I just, need to get the learning. So this phonetic spelling, the Say My Name campaign gives us a chance to kind of get out front of that. So you can see using my name phonetically, people are a little bit more comfortable to potentially be able to pronounce that. And again, as we look at international work that we're doing, all the more important that we take the time to let people feel comfortable that they can engage with us as they need to engage with us without feeling any sort of barrier around being able to how to address this kind of thing. Okay, so with that, today, just by a quick thumbs up in our Zoom call here, how many of you have been on Mural before? I know some of my students, I see some thumbs up, excellent. Okay, so this won't be, for anyone who hasn't been yet, this is a digital whiteboard platform. And we use this for some of the collaboration work that we do. For those who have been there before, it probably won't be quite as overwhelming when you first get in. And I'm sure many of you can remember the first time you were there, you're like, holy moly. So this is a chance for us to go in. We're going to do a little bit of a warm-up activity just to make sure that everybody's pretty comfortable pardon me, with the actual program. And then we're actually going to spend most of our time in Mural. And we'll just do a quick little overview of all the SDGs. Again, this is SDG 101. This is very top level. If you have a big background in SDG work already, this might not be quite as compelling for you. If you've never heard of them, Hopefully this is a really great introduction today. At the end of that, in the mural, we'll actually have a little bit of an interactive program where you can actually add your voice to one of the SDGs in a particular way as well. So I'm going to ask M if he doesn't mind dropping in our, oh, actually, I will drop in our chat the link to go to the mural. And so one little tip, team, as we navigate over to mural is that because we won't really be on Zoom until maybe we come back, feel free to sort of minimize that window. Really recommend that maybe you close any other programs that are running that you don't need it. Mural can be a bit of a heavy one at times. For those who can't access the mural, I am going to share my screen so that you can actually follow along as well. But obviously, in terms of interactivity, always way better if you can actually be in the mural itself. So give me a second here, team. I can see a whole bunch of people jumping in. I'm just going to share my screen for you for those who maybe can't engage but still want to watch.
And as Q's doing that, the one thing I always say that for those who haven't used it before, the key point is if you can look at the Zoom aspect of it, because otherwise you're seeing it pretty, sorry, if you're sharing the screen, it doesn't matter. But if you're in the actual Zoom, there's actually a Zoom button that will let you go and see things very close up. So that's a key point.
Awesome. Thank you, Em. Okay, so we actually are going to do a little bit of a warm up, but before we do, adding up what Martin was just talking about in terms of some of the tips, if you've never done it before, we really want you to, so if you, first and foremost, the Zoom function is probably the most important tip and trick on Zoom, on Mural, zooming on Mural, not back on Zoom. Okay, yeah, we're back here. Mural is to be able to zoom in and out. And so there's a couple ways you can do that. If you have a mouse or a trackpad, you can just scroll up, scroll down, that'll actually zoom you in and out. If you don't have that and you prefer sort of keys, you can hit the control and either your plus or minus button, that'll bring you back and forth. And then finally, along the bottom right-hand side for you following, there's a move mode here too, and a little slider that brings us in and out. Where I want to direct your attention first and foremost is to the right-hand side where you see the outline. So I can see everybody's already in it. They're mural ninjas. They're already making these things. But for anyone who hasn't had a chance, the right-hand side in this outline, this actually gives you the chance to follow along each particular section. So if I click on warm-up question 1, it brings us right to the point where all these students are already starting to drop in. And the first question we want you to do is, what do you think change making is? For those who've never used Mural, in the top left corner, you'll see a little dog ear. If you click that, that'll bring up a chance to drop a sticky note in. And when you drop that sticky note into our circle, then you can type on it and add, what do you think change making is? And I can see a few different ones here as I'm looking. Oh, one other important tip for those who maybe get a little overwhelmed with all the cursors. If you actually hover over your icon at the bottom, there's actually a little line that says, don't show me cursors. And you can activate that so that you'll only see your own cursor. And sometimes that's a little nicer than watching all of those cursors kind of run at the same time. Okay, so just taking a quick look at what do we think change making is? Make a difference in the community, making change in society that has an impact in the world, making a difference for the better within your community, nationally and globally. Love it, love it, love it. I'm gonna zoom in a little bit more here so I can read some of these other ones. Positive change, new thinking, new ideologies. Love that. Change in society, to use your voice for the better, to make a difference, serving the greater good by facilitating important change. Ooh, I love this one. Taking action towards sustainability. Obviously, that's something we're going to chat a little bit about today in terms of the sustainability. Let's see, making important change, something different, tackling a problem. Love it. Okay, and I can see some of you, again, mural ninjas have already jumped into the next section. So along the right-hand side, if we go to warm up question number 2, and again, this is just to get you comfortable using Mural, being able to actually pull a sticky note in and being able to type. Really wanted to ask each of you, what social issue, and it could be anything, it could be super broad, it could be really small, but what social issue are you most passionate about? And so I can see a few in here being discrimination against LGBTQ communities. I can see affordable housing, food security, poverty, hunger, racism, poverty and wealth inequality. Love that. Women's equality, climate change, poverty, hunger. Just scrolling in to see a couple of others here. Okay, you can see the leg. Oh, I really like this. It's hard to pick one, all are important. That's very, very true. And that's a little bit about what today is too. And I'm just seeing in the chat here a quick little note too. So can we respond to mural prompts on the chat if we can't access murals? Zainab, absolutely. Feel free. Martin will be watching the chat, or I will be watching the chat as Martin's doing his thing as well. So if you want to respond to prompts into the chat on Zoom, by all means, feel free to do that. Awesome. Okay, so sort of expected this to need a bit more time in terms of warm up, and you guys knocked it out of the park. So I don't think we actually need quite as much time as I thought we did, but that's great. So we're a little bit more comfortable with it. Where we really want everyone to feel good is, can I actually drop a sticky in? Or as Zainab said, can I actually use the mural to give my feedback? And that's a part that as we get towards the end, that's something that is going to be more important. So what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to summon everyone, which is going to make you follow what I'm looking at. So hopefully everyone's had a chance to actually drop that into the chat. For the next, say, 25 minutes or so, we're just going to go through some of the history of the SDGs and the top level SDGs. So a little bit easier if you're not sort of moving around the mural, just to follow me. So I'm going to summon everyone so that you're all with me right now. And we're going to move to our opening, which is our SDG 101. So a quick little glossary. Again, we're really bad for using acronyms at Georgian College in general. We say CCSI all the time. Uzma, thank you for dropping that into the chat as well. Again, if you want to use the chat, definitely do for your contributions. That's amazing. So what this winds up translating to as well is that, so then we hear about the UN SDGs, but maybe we've never actually heard of what UN SDGs stands for. So the UN is an acronym that stands for United Nations. Let's see, Britain coming in, we'll just admit. The UN SDGs, well, that stands for the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So that's what our SDGs stands for, the Sustainable Development Goals. You'll also hear a little bit when you're talking about SDGs is this concept of Agenda 2030. And sometimes you'll hear global goals as well. So Agenda 2030, what is that? That is basically the name of the plan that the Sustainable Development Goals are aspiring to achieve. And so we look at the year 2030 as our chance to address each and every one of these SDGs in a really significant way. Now, it's going to be really, really challenging for us to meet those levels that the SDGs are asking us to meet. But in some ways, we really feel as a world that we need those aspirational goals to really move the needle as some of our challenges get bigger and bigger. Another acronym you might hear is MDGs. And so this stands for the Millennium Development Goals. And it was actually the predecessor to the SDGs. So we actually had the MDGs before we all shifted towards what we now call the SDGs. And so what really are the SDGs if we were going to look at it in a broader sense? Well, they are really about a call to action. And that's what's really important to remember. So as we go through them, you're going to see we've got a bit of a framework that's actually there. But for each and every one of them, they are about a call to action to promote prosperity while also protecting the planet. So really looking for this concept of flourishing. How do we create a flourishing world where people are thriving, where environments are thriving, where economies are thriving, everything working together? All countries, whether you're poor, rich, middle income, developing, they all play a role in this, however they choose to. And we really talk about how ending poverty, which is the real thrust of where the SDGs came from. It was about creating zero poverty in the world by 2030. But it goes hand in hand with other strategies too that build economic growth and address a whole range of other social issues. So for any of you who are in my social entrepreneurship class, you'll remember a little bit around talking the intersectionality of everything, how, at a systems level, all these things really contribute and inform some of the other pieces. And it's the same thing with the SDGs. That in order to end poverty, we're actually going to have to address education and health, social protection, job opportunities, climate change, environmental protection. The last thing that's kind of unique about the SDGs, these were created in 2015 when we actually moved over. So COVID wasn't a reality yet, but they actually also provide us this framework for COVID-19 recovery. And so obviously we're a year into the pandemic now, and you're starting to see many of the countries shift to looking at the SDGs and saying, okay, so as we try to get our economies going again, as we try to get our people going again, what can the SDGs help us inform and help us design so that we're actually moving forward in a more sustainable way? One of the cool things about the pandemic, it's weird to even say cool things about the pandemic, but one of the cool things was being able to see in real time really huge shifts in the environment. So things that we thought were maybe impossible or would take too long, we got this real quick glimpse at the concept of like, what happens if we really cut our carbon emissions? And what we're discovering now is that even though we had an incredible shift of cutting down carbon, especially at the very beginning of the pandemic, it's still not making as big of a dent as we thought it would. And so really, really important that we look then for more actionable items that let us make the kind of impact that we're trying to, so that we can meet the targets of the goals. Okay, so what are the actual purpose of the goals? Hang on a second. I'm just going to block other cursors because that way I can actually read the mural that I'm working on as well. Okay, so the purpose of the goals, well, they're a cohesive and integrated package of global aspirations. So what is the world hoping for globally? What are we aspiring to achieve? Well, this is sort of an integrated and cohesive package of all the different areas. And, obviously, changing the entire world in a huge way. There's a whole bunch of areas and we are capturing them in 17, but really it is about having the flexibility to work them together and capture some of those other areas. It really calls upon all countries to balance 3 different dimensions for sustainable development. So this concept of economic growth, we need to still make sure that we are growing economically in a sustainable way. Alongside that, environmental sustainability. We need to make sure that we're being sustainable to the environment that we're actually drawing a lot of these resources off that we need for living. And then social inclusion. And of course, that's one that has become even more prevalent throughout the last year, is the challenges we felt about being physically separated in a lot of cases from our social networks, and how, at times, while we can still connect online, at times we're still missing sort of that deeper connection part. So we're communicating, but we're not really connecting necessarily. So the SDGs really looks at all countries addressing all of those things through this actual framework. It is a shared action framework for people, planet, prosperity to be implemented by all countries and stakeholders acting in collaborative partnership. Can't stress that piece enough. This, as much as the SDGs are a framework for each country to address their issues within the ways that fit them best, it's not a siloed operation. We really need to be looking at what other nations are doing in collaborative partnership, so that the efforts that we're making, the changes that we're trying to incorporate, are not doing so at the negative impact of another country. And so really working in partnership to create some of these great impacts, but on a global scale. So really rising the tide for all boats, if you've ever heard that analogy before. So specifically Canada now. Well, Canada adopted the 17 SDGs in 2015, and we designed a blueprint to sort of achieve a better and more sustainable future for everyone by 2030. Now, again, just as I sort of mentioned, so Canada adopted in 2015, different countries adopted at different times. Not every country has adopted the SDGs. But Agenda 2030 gives us this unique opportunity at Georgian in particular, all post-secondary institutions, to really be the leaders of transformative change. And so one question I want to sort of seed for you is, as students at Georgian College, or for some of you who might be community members joining us today as well, and thinking about your relationship to the college, how can Georgian create transformative change? How can Georgian be the vehicle to help support the SDGs, to help build stronger impacts that we're actually looking for? So I encourage each of you to sort of let that question sit in your head as we go through the SDGs, to try and figure out where your place, where you're going to stand in all of this, especially through your Georgian College journey. Okay, so with that, we're going to jump into the 17 SDGs. It's going to be just sort of top level, we're going to end with some resources where you can actually access more and more of this information if you want to do a deeper dive. Obviously, really encourage you to do so if you're interested. But for now, I just want to give a little top level in case you've never heard of one, or in case you want to actually learn a little bit about what maybe this SDG means, because I'm not familiar with that language. This will just give us a very top level dive. So if you're still following me, I'm going to bring you to our SDG number 1. So SDG number 1 is no poverty. And this is about ending poverty in all of its forms everywhere. Again, aspirational, lofty goal. How do we possibly start to do that? There are a whole bunch of metrics, ways we measure, a whole bunch of targets that we use. In Canada, they are slightly different than in other countries because our country is more unique than, say, a different country doesn't have the same challenges. But one area I like to point out on this little note here is this one right here, which is that young workers are twice as likely to be living in extreme poverty as adult workers. What's fascinating about that is that the vast majority of students at Georgian College are the next generation of young workers. And when you think that they're living in extreme poverty or twice as likely to live in extreme poverty, it really does get us to question things a little bit more. We recently attended the Ashoka conference. So Ashoka is our international change-making body, of which Georgian College is the first and only change-making college in Canada. And there was this really fascinating study. This was a US study, but it was really fascinating that they measured sort of the insecurity around housing and homelessness for a particular area. It was actually out in San Diego. While the school did this, they actually measured the level of insecurity for housing and food and homelessness of the staff for the University of San Diego. And they discovered that a huge number, a shocking number, percentage of their staff was living with food insecurity or housing insecurity or even homelessness. And so this reality of how many of us are actually living in poverty or in extreme poverty or under the poverty line is something that can't be estimated. And it's something that we don't always share with one another. There's a lot of shame around it. So opening up those conversations is part of our movement towards making that change. Number 2 is zero hunger. Now, so this is about end hunger, achieve food security, improve nutrition, and promote sustainable agriculture. So for those of you who have maybe worked in food systems before, we see this getting bigger and bigger as an issue in terms of sustainable agriculture, using the land, but giving back to the land too, really being in a reciprocal relationship with the land to ensure that it can continue to give us its bounty. One of the pieces that kind of like to bring out in this is the fact that the pandemic is an additional threat to all these food systems. So if you can go back a year ago in your own heads and remember how we had panics over toilet paper, how we had panics over you couldn't find flour or yeast in any store anywhere. And so what we need to be really aware of with the pandemic and as we continue is sort of the fragility sometimes of our food systems. We have an expectation that we can just go to the grocery store and get what we need here in Canada. And often that's the case in more metropolis areas, certainly not in the north where there's a lot of food insecurity. So we have a lot of work to do in our own country, but really recognizing again, the intersectionality, really, really important because as we have pandemics or unexpected things that happen, our system is pretty fragile. Number 3 is about good health and well-being. So this is about ensuring healthy lives, promoting well-being at all ages. This is obviously a really big one too. You know, what does well-being look like? What does good health look like? And the point I always like to bring up on this particular one is if you look down to the very bottom, it talks about how less than half of the global population is covered by essential health services. And again, when we think about what we've collectively gone through together over the past year, you know, it's a little scary to recognize that half the world doesn't have access to the same essential health services that we rely on. We're also seeing that spike a lot when it comes to mental health and being able to consistently access affordable and then effective mental health supports when we have half the world who can't get the physical supports that we are sort of expecting and used to. This is a real bit of a halcyon call to everyone to recognize that we really need to work together a little bit more. Number 4, this is about quality education. So ensuring inclusive and equitable quality education and promoting lifelong learning. Obviously for Georgian College, this is an especially important one because we really still have work to do about ensuring that anybody has accessibility to us, that we're inclusive, that we're promoting some of the diversity that's needed in terms of accessing and ways to access the education system. There's probably a huge dialogue that can be had in terms of the system of education, the role that Georgian plays, and then the role that students play. So if you think about yourself and being able to access, how many of you were stressed out when it came to, my laptop? I don't even have a laptop, or my laptop isn't strong, or every time I go to WebEx, it kicks me out, or some of these or my internet's no good. So these real access to education questions became much more relevant, especially in Canada, over the last little bit, which is starting to bring up these questions about how do we design a better system? How do we move forward in a way that's, a little more equitable, a little more inclusive? Looking at number 5, gender equality. So achieving gender equality, empowering all women and girls. This is one that, again, when we think about the past year in particular, we've seen that how our lockdowns are really increasing the risk of violence against women and girls in particular. And I have the privilege of being the faculty support for a group called Man Up, who is doing some amazing work around gender-based violence and trying to ensure that all of Georgian students, as a Georgian group, Georgian students have access to the necessary resources, information, and perspectives. For those who are interested in maybe learning a little bit more, there's actually an asynchronous video at Changemaker Residency Week that the Man Up team has put together that talks a little bit about their program, how you might be able to get involved if it's something that's important to you. But again, one of those issues that has always been a big issue, but that got exacerbated through the pandemic as well, as more and more women and girls were exposed to even higher levels of violence, and of course didn't have the capacity a lot of times to go anywhere. We are in lockdown. Where can you go to flee for safety, for resources? So definitely an important one. Clean water and sanitation, again, one of those pieces that in Canada we take for granted a lot of time, that the clean water, but you can see through this that 3 billion people worldwide, they actually lack basic hand washing facilities at home. So it's wonderful that we talk about how important it is to wash our hands in this age of COVID, and to be able to drink water straight from a tap. But the reality is, when you're talking about 3 billion people who lack that basic hand washing facility at home, we're really leaving out a lot of the world, and that is one of the areas where, as much as we need to in Canada figure out ways for us to ensure that every Canadian has access to water. Some of our northern communities, especially our Indigenous communities, don't have access to clean water for drinking in particular. And so how do we start having these kinds of conversations where we're including everybody and we're ensuring that everyone has the same level of access to some of the safety components that we all kind of take for granted at times? Number 7, this is about affordable and clean energy. So this is ensuring access to affordable, reliable, sustainable, modern energy for all. And again, in the West, we tend to be a little bit more privileged in terms of where we live. Access to energy isn't quite as challenging. But for any of you who maybe were around during the big blackout in 2000, I think it was 2003, if I can remember properly. So going back quite a few years, it was pretty interesting to see how dependent we'd already become on energy and on accessing electricity. And it's something that now in our digital era, as we're moving further and further towards virtual teaching, virtual education, virtual meetings, and how often we use our cell phones, that this concept of affordable, reliable energy is hitting us closer to home. That if we did lose the capacity to generate electricity and do it in a sustainable way, that we would have a lot of current gaps. One of those gaps is really about the health facilities. When you look at 1 in 4 not being electrified in developing countries, you think about walking into a hospital here in Canada and think about how much energy is being used and how much energy is being relied upon in surgical rooms where they have to keep a certain temperature going. All these keeping the machines running and then keeping the machines cool. When you think about health facilities, that 1 in 4 of them in a developing country has no electricity, you can imagine the limitations. And so for the citizens of those areas, how do they get the same quality of healthcare that they may need, especially in crisis? So important conversations that we need to continue having. Okay, number 8, this is a really relevant one to each of you in terms of decent work and economic growth. So promoting sustained, inclusive, sustainable economic growth, full and productive employment, and decent work for all. And I really love the term that the SDGs chose here where, yeah, Chris, a great point. We do take for granted the small things. I love the word decent, because what is decent work? And this is something that for each of you, really encourage you to have this conversation with yourself of saying, you know, what is decent work to you? And what is decent pay to you? You know, we still know that in Canada, we have a huge number of people who are living below the poverty line and yet are working tons of hours. They're working precarious work. And we use the term precarious work of those who maybe are going contract to contract, or those who don't know how many hours they're going to get next week. And what we saw, of course, with the pandemic was then a whole bunch of people start to lose the incomes that they've been reliant on. And even when they had them, they may only be bringing up to the poverty line. So this is starting to bring up these really interesting conversations around, well, universal basic income, UBI is one big conversation around this, but also in terms of living wage. You know, how are we paying people properly? How do we ensure that their safety is prioritized in the work that they're doing? And how do we get people to maybe find a little bit of purpose in the work that they're going to do too, of recognizing a more holistic relationship to what decent work is, and how when we look at it like that, the chances of our economy actually growing in a sustainable way become much, much stronger. The part I always like to point out in this is about tourism. And of course, we have a hospitality and tourism program here at Georgian College, and a pretty spectacular one at that, and some amazing students that actually come through this program that have started these things. And you think about the tourism industry right now, the restaurant industry, hospitality in general, and how devastatingly that industry has been struck. And so there's this opportunity now as we start to look at how do we want to bring the world back here? How do we want to bring tourism back? You know, do we want to make sure that the environment is really prioritized in this? We want to make sure that for servers, for cooks, that they become, you know, paid appropriately so that they actually have living wages. All these little things that we have the opportunity to revisit because that's been such a massive change that's happened. Number 9, industry, innovation, and infrastructure. So this is about building the resilient sort of infrastructure, the pieces we need, promoting inclusivity, sustainable industrialization, fostering innovation. I know for many of my students, you've heard me use innovation many, many times, especially in social innovation sort of perspective. But the truth is, this is really where we're at now, is when you look at the very bottom of that particular page where it says fewer than 1 in 5 use the internet in sort of lower developed countries. That's really fascinating because we've become really, really reliant on the internet for information access, for being able to communicate with one another. So these are where, again, we're taking it for granted. But if you have fewer than 1 in 5 in developing countries who are able to use the internet, or who are able to access the internet and then be able to use it, we've got a pretty big gap, and we're leaving out a big part of the world that has a lot to teach us, a lot to share with us. And so recognizing that infrastructure, as it's sort of the boring one when we talk about the SDGs, not a lot of people are like, you know what, I can't wait to do? I can't wait to improve infrastructure. But they do go hand in hand. This is part of the holism. We need to have those strong infrastructures that promote inclusivity for everyone so that we can actually reap the bounty of every single human in the world, or every single human in Canada if we're looking through the Canadian lens. Which ties in really nicely to SDG number 10, which is all about reducing the inequalities within and among the different countries. So we've really seen, obviously, you know, as students, you may actually know it yourself, have experienced it yourself, but our most vulnerable groups are the ones who are being hit hardest by the pandemic. So this pandemic, again, is giving us this opportunity to revisit our relationships. When you think about long-term care and some of the focus, you know, and well, some of the gaps that occurred, some of the tragedies that occurred, and now the refocus on that. I can tell you from firsthand experience that the issues in long-term care were around a long time before the pandemic actually hit. And so how do we start shining the light on other areas where we aren't talking about them yet because we haven't had tragedy yet? So really reducing those inequalities is an area that we have to prioritize, again, to assure flourishing for everyone. Number 11 talks about sustainable cities and communities. And so this is, you maybe heard of the term smart cities before. That's a really great example of it. But we basically are looking to make cities and settlements inclusive, safe, resilient, and the big one being sustainable. So again, one of the easy ones to kind of look at is that concept of affordable housing for those who are maybe even just in the Barrie area or from other areas you're joining us from today. Housing is exceedingly expensive. Affordable housing is A, still not always that affordable, and then B, very, very tough to come by as well. So again, really thinking about our cities and how do we create flourishing, dynamic cities that are drawing in the best individuals, the best diversity, the best talent into our area, and so that we have the best chance of sustainable growth at innovation within our actual communities. SDG number 12, this is about responsible consumption and production. So this is ensuring sustainable consumption and production patterns. This is one that hits us on a very, very personal level because we are all consumers in our own way. And so really encourage you to think about this one in terms of your particular relationship to consumption and the choices you're making, who you're supporting, the types of products that you're buying. Our little exercise we're going to get to in a few minutes here really does draw on you to say, what are some of the things that you can do that allow you to make a positive impact around this. So when we look at one area, we see the top right here about electronic waste growing by 38%. And less than 20% of it's recycled. Kind of critical when you think that we are all connecting right here on electronic devices. And so, our reliance on those has meant even more of them coming into production, even more of them being used, which means that eventually more of them being replaced. And if we're only recycling, less than 20% of them, then that's going to be a huge problem that's going to pile up in a hurry on us. So again, having that responsible consumption. There's some interesting comments, interesting discussions right now by the federal government. We'll see in the next 6 months whether this comes to or not, but around single-use plastics and around phasing those out and making them illegal. So again, looking for patterns of production that actually are a little bit more sustainable. Number 13 is a big one that many of you, I'm sure, are already familiar with, the concept of climate action. But there is a real, urgent need to take this action to combat some of the climate change and its impacts. I always love talking in this particular one about an experience with the Citizens Climate Lobby that I had a number of years ago. We would go to the federal government in Ottawa and we would have dialogue with them and we would lobby them to try and incorporate more and more environmentally friendly perspectives or policies. And we would often, some amazing politicians who could see some of these challenges, but we would often be told that, we're not going to do anything because not enough people care about this. And I think what we've now seen is this huge shift where more and more people are making it a priority and making it so an area they address in their personal life, but also one that they talk about, one that they care about. And so I have a lot of faith that our climate agenda is moving forward at a faster pace than it ever did. We obviously have a long way to go with it, but still I'm feeling very hopeful. Number 4, sort of tied to this concept about life below water. So what's happening underneath our oceans, and whether that's, some of the pollution that's actually going in there, whether that's sustainable fishing practices. For anyone who's maybe looked, I don't remember off the top of my head what the movie was, but it was an incredible documentary about the coral reef. And how the corals were actually dying due to the temperature of the oceans rising, and how those corals were such a critical area to maintain a hugely biodiverse range of animals, of species. So really, really recognizing that all of our choices have this impact. How do we protect things, especially those that maybe we can't see? So we're typically above the water. We don't see what's actually going on. How do we still ensure that that's part of our decision-making process? Same goes for on land, right? So thinking about our forests and the deforestation that's being taken place, some of the mining activities that aren't sustainable mining, the ways that we are impacting our land, and the critical need for us to ensure that our land is going to be able to continue to serve us in all these great ways. And that means we have to serve it in some important ways too, in terms of sustainability. Number 16 is our peace, justice, and strong institutions. So this is, again, looking at sort of our institutions that are either supporting or hindering our ability to be peaceful societies, and ensuring that our institutions are strong, that we have trust, that we can rely on these. And we saw a lot of this sort of come to head in the US in particular, but also in Canada over the past 6 months, 8 months, as changes occurred. So what we're really looking for with this SDG is promoting peaceful and inclusive societies for sustainable development, providing access to justice for all, and build effective, accountable, inclusive institutions at all levels. That access to justice piece is a really fascinating one. It's one of those areas that, unless you personally or someone you care about personally has maybe been involved with the criminal justice system, we don't ever think about access to justice. We just assume we can do it. But in Canada, there's a very complex and layered challenge to accessing the criminal justice system in an effective way, in a way that serves us, in a way that we understand the language, or that we can actually get transportation to get us to the courthouse to actually engage, or that we can afford legal aid, because there's a whole bunch of restrictions around that. So access to justice, just in Canada alone, is an area that is really ripe for re-envisioning. I have the pleasure of working with some criminal justice students this term, actually, who are developing some really innovative insights and some solutions towards the challenges and barriers that are coming with this access to justice. And our last SDG, this is our partnership for the goals. And this is the one that people kind of look at and say, well, okay, I sort of get all the other 16, like they're sort of focused on something. Number 17, partnership for the goals. What is that actually? What are we having partnerships for? Well, this is what we talked about in the very beginning, about this concept of, we can't do this in silos. The only way that we're going to allow the world to flourish and be responsible and sustainable in all these different ways is if we actually work together. If we ensure that everybody is addressing their challenges while thinking about everybody else that their challenges are also impacting, or that their solutions are potentially impacting. One of the pieces on here is about that fixed broadband subscription. So again, thinking about internet and our reliance on that, and how different it would be if we did not have, and I live rural, so I know how challenging it was, especially in the past few years, about getting consistent internet. Well, if I can't get that now, all of a sudden, I have to actually travel somewhere in order to be able to connect online with people. Really do take it for granted. And so understanding that, many countries, they don't have the broadband. It's a huge challenge to build that infrastructure. But that access to education, that access to information, and that access to connection are areas that are so critical that we talked about off the very hop, that we really need to look at that it's not going to be enough if Canada just happens to build the best broadband network in the world. We really need to ensure that everyone in the world is getting access, and sometimes it's going to take some really innovative approaches. The other piece about partnership for the goals is that when we move to how to use the SDGs themselves are actually meant to be used in partnership with one another. So like we talked about, you really can't just focus on one without it addressing intentionally or otherwise a few of the other issues. We use the SDGs as a systems change intervention. So when we're looking at the broad system, these SDGs help us sort of plug in and make changes to a whole bunch of elements of that system. So for an example, if I was trying to address goal number 2 around zero hunger, well, with that, I actually have to include goal 3, goal 4, goal 6, goal 8, goal all the way down, because I can't just look at zero hunger and solutions on its own without also addressing, good health and well-being is going to be an important thing. We're going to probably need some quality education. Well, if we're going to have zero hunger, that means we really need to figure out our clean water and sanitation elements. If we're going to have production of food, then we need to understand decent work and potentially economic growth. So you can put, and obviously access to food with reduced inequalities. You can see how when we start to look for solutions around one particular SDG, it's really, really critical that we understand that these are meant to work together, that they actually all connect to each other to varying degrees. in order to promote that prosperity while at the same time making sure that we protect the planet. Okay, that was a whole bunch of talking. Sorry, that's never the best way to start off our day at 9 o'clock in the morning. Just listen to the yammer. But with our SDG 101, this is really meant just as an introductory for someone who's maybe never heard of it before. So I'm going to draw your attention a little bit to the resources. This is again on the mural. If you want to actually find out a deeper dive, really encourage you to go to some of these websites, to go through some of these links. There's some incredible information out there. And this is, again, just the top level. You can go super, super deep in terms of learning about them, but then also learning about what different countries are doing, what Canada is doing in particular, and sometimes even what your communities are doing, depending on what community you're in. So do encourage you, if you're interested in it, take a deep dive, pull some of these, go onto the mural, actually copy paste some of these different URLs and go take a look at that. Okay, so to end up today, to sort of finish up, I want to actually incorporate each of you and your voices as a bit of a contribution to this conversation today. And so one of the things that we often hear is, okay, so, Quentin, I get the SDGs, I see how they're really important, but at the end of the day, like, really, what can I do about it? What are the ways that I could actually make an impact on this if I'm not working for some multinational that has, all this impact? And so the UN SDG, or the UN, the United Nations, actually created this lazy person's guide to saving the world. And for me, I think it's fantastic because I will be the first one to admit that at times, even I'm not feeling like I'm able to tackle something as big as maybe, zero hunger or no poverty. So they basically built out that you've got 4 different levels that you could potentially sort of engage at. And again, this is just on a personal level. So we look at our sofa superstar, the things you can do from your couch. Save electricity by plugging appliances into a power strip and turning them off completely when not in use, including your computer. The reason I love bringing that one up is because I am so guilty of not doing that. And I see this and I think about it, and the SDGs are really important to me, and climate change is really important to me. And yet I figure that I can't even take that step of just turning off my power bar when my electronics aren't in use. So small little ways where, even though we might not think that, we're going to have this huge impact, if we all did it, it actually would make a huge impact. And again, that's a very, personal way, not saying you have to do it. This is about you finding your way to it. Some of the things you can do from home, shorter showers. That's actually a big one in terms of how much energy the shower, especially a hot shower, winds up using. Composting. We're very fortunate to have a pretty great composting system in Ontario, in most parts of Ontario, I should say, where, we can actually compost a lot of the food scraps, and it doesn't actually go into sort of the landfills, which theoretically you think, well, the food scraps aren't going to be problematic, but there is some challenges in terms of breaking down other elements when it's mixed in. Plus, we actually can use that as a means of fertilizing the ground for other farming. And so there's actual value in those food scraps. The things you could do in your neighborhood, I do think that part of it is, you can see here sort of like, let your favorite business know ocean friendly or shop for sustainable seafood. I actually think that you could expand that even, saying like, where are you shopping? And obviously in the pandemic, it's pretty limited, but when you think about the ways that you spend your money, the organizations you support. I often, with my social entrepreneurship students, we actually have this big conversation around like, what are the companies that we're supporting? And not, the reality is we're all learning, and we're all learning to get better. And sometimes the information from the company makes it look like they're doing really good things, but they might not be. And, other companies that are maybe aligned a bit more to our values. So it's a really great example of, how are you using your dollars, your time, your voice in these different ways to either support certain organizations who are aligned with the issues that you care about, even if they're not specifically speaking of the SDGs, that you just know that they're working towards things that matter to you as well. Versus just doing things maybe out of convenience or just unawareness. So that's an opportunity, again, for those who are interested in maybe being more proactive around where they spend their money, the ways they engage. That's a great example of it. And, the things you can do at work, the one is like voice your support for equal pay for equal work. I always like that one in the sense of it's a really tough one. It's a very, very tough one to speak up against big employers or even small employers. We have a little bit of a mentality, and you really, really recognize how big of a jump that is. And we're in a country that's actually, actually looks at human rights as being, workers' rights as well. But this one right above it about mentor young people, that's where I can really see every single one of us potentially connecting is how do we start to potentially mentor, and it doesn't have to be younger, how do we mentor other people? How do we show up for other people in order to sort of support them and enable them to thrive? Okay, so our very last exercise here is about your voice. And so what I want you to do is now that I'm going to release everyone so that you're all free again. So thanks for following through that. And really, now that we've just had that broad line, top line, broad overview of the SDGs, really, really curious to know, what's an SDG that's, interesting to you, and what is specifically, I want you to drop a sticky note over the SDG that you're most passionate about, and how are you committed to making a change to it today? And that could be an actual action that you're thinking about. Maybe it's a deeper dive on, a particular area. So I'm going to encourage each of you, because we'll obviously keep these murals for posterity too, to contribute your voice today based on what you've learned, maybe based on some of your experiences that you've had. Drop your own note over your SDG and say, what's a way that you could potentially impact that today? There's no right, wrong. This is really about your contribution. You don't have to put your name on it or anything like that, but just a way for us to show a little bit of potential solidarity around, the impact that we could have just as our group today around some of these particular areas. And so just as we're actually dropping those in, I'm seeing them come in here, and I'll go revisit them. I did see a question come into the chat. So, hey, Quentin, what's your, Uzma said, don't throw litter in the streets, keep clean environment. Yeah, so again, littering, right? Attention. One of those small little ways that we as an individual can actually make our own difference. I see a question from Stephanie. What's your opinion on bottled water? Do you drink it? So my opinion on bottled water, I think Stephanie's probably asking from an environmental or recycling perspective. Again, Stephanie, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but that's I'm sort of operating from that assumption as to why you might ask that question. So I'm a big believer that we have incredible, innovative and creative minds who are able to create better plastic. And so there was a great Fill It Forward program that Georgian's been affiliated with. It actually came out of the Owen Sound campus that our team in particular, the Center for Change Making and Social Innovation, has embraced around using less water bottles, around refilling our mugs. I personally, I actually don't typically drink bottled water. I have a partner who's been sort of on the environmental agenda for years and years and years, who has taught me quite a bit around sort of practices that I can do. And so typically have my refillable mug that we'll use. Not entirely fair though for me to make a comment on that for me, because I also don't drink a ton of water. So I recognize for other people, they go through the eight things a day. But maybe a better example, if you ask me, what do I think about takeout coffee? Well, I really I do drink a lot of coffee. And so I really try to use my takeout mug, my reusable mug for that, which has been a real challenge during the pandemic, obviously. But I've just found that I actually haven't been going outside the home to get my coffees anymore. Umi saying, sorry, the chat just moved on me here.
I can read that. I teach myself and my children turn off extra lights to save electricity and relieve burden on industry to generate more energy for ourselves and save to run industries.
Love it, Uzma. That's an awesome one. Again, small little ways, right? And just at in our home. I mean, that's a perfect example of those extra lights that we kind of are maybe not thinking about. But there's actual benefit, direct benefit in terms of saving our own costs, but really recognizing how those small little actions can all add up as well. So I see Umi also above that saying Lazy Person's Guide's not only for saving the world, it benefits us a lot. So exactly what so we just talked about for Uzma as well, about how there's a direct benefit to ourselves. Zainab saying sustainable cities and communities in terms of the SDG that Zainab maybe is most passionate about, or that Zainab feels they could make the biggest change around. So I'm just going to go back quickly in our last couple minutes here. I want to look at some of the contributions that everybody was putting in. Helping others with different resources, donate, provide support, donate. Cool device. My family turns off our outlets if we forget in a number of minutes. Oh, very cool. Yeah, sometimes using technology to our advantage, right? In a way that, there are timers that can be set on some of these things. That's a great one. Collecting rainwater in barrels, save it, use it to water my garden. Absolutely love that. I too am moving towards that direction. I have not, the barrels I used last year got a little stagnant. So I have to create a better system for my garden this year, but I am moving towards that too. Love that one. Love this choice, quitting fast fashion, choosing a plant-based diet, both really fantastic choices if they align for you. For the fast fashion one though, if you've never had a chance to sort of dig in a little bit to recognize the environmental impacts and also worker and children rights impacts that the fashion industry has, really encourage you to do a bit of a deeper dive in that area, because it's pretty shocking about how many people and how much of our planet is harmed for us to be able to get super cheap clothing. So a couple great ones. Just going through here, promote companies that use things to create jewelry, to create things like jewelry or things we can, reusable, again, recycling. Really love it. I want to just see this quality education one here. Helping find a way to help with the lack of resources for children and learning disabilities. Yes, love it. Increase in quality education, ultimate increase in employment, increase in the growth of the country. There's a great example, great contribution around the intersectionality of some of these different areas as well. Just by hopping on, you're going to solve problems 2, 3, and 4, make the world better. Yeah, again, donate blood. Oh, good one. See some of them, and there's some great ones here. So I encourage each of you as well to dive in and look at what some of your peers are actually sharing, because there's some really fantastic ones. Really love the little plant that made it in there. One of the Mural Ninjas knew about that too. Less use of plastic. We see life on land, water bottles. Fantastic. Okay, so we are at the end of this workshop, but thank you for joining me today. And thank you, Martin, for co-piloting this little venture. Again, just an introduction, really encourage you to check out the SDGs in a deeper way, in a meaningful way for you, if this was engaging in any way, and really hope you enjoy the rest of Changemaker Residency Week. Look forward to seeing you in another session later.
Thank you, Quentin. Thank you, Martin.
Thank you very much, Quentin. Just always a pleasure to see you at work. Very in-depth and a beautiful flow through all the information.
Thank you, Em. Appreciate it. Have a great week, everybody.
Hello.
Hey, Parth.
Hi. So where can we find the link of this mural later on?
Can drop that into the chat for you right now, in fact.
Thank you so much.
You're
Appreciate
welcome.
it.
You're welcome.
Have a good day.
Thanks, Parth. You too.
Bye, Martin. Bye.
Okay, team. If there's no other questions, we'll stop the recording, and we'll say goodbye to everyone. Have a great rest of your week at Changemaker Residency Week. I hope you enjoy some of those sessions, and again, encourage you to do your own deep dive, figure out how the SDGs create meaning for you and what kind of relationship you want to have with them. So thanks again for today.